All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and kick things off. First of all, I want to welcome everyone to our Spilling the Beans event. We really appreciate you guys taking time out of your day, and we hope that you find value in the content that you're going to be seeing today. I am super stoked for today's Spilling the Beans because we have some amazing folks here that have joined Dean. So normally Dean Sheely, obviously, you guys know him. Typically the guy that's on the call and giving us lots of really good nuggets of information. And I am super stoked because he has invited 3 extremely talented engineers from High Point Networks to join the call today. And I think you guys will find a lot of good content in what they're going to present today. So it'll be a nice, fun group effort. And again, without further ado, Dean, I'm going to let you get started and kick things off and introduce our fun guest today.
All right, awesome. Thanks, Brandy. So the title of this month's Spilling the Beans is Backup and Recovery in a Ransomware Era. And again, like Brandy said, we're going to kind of take a different approach today. I'm going to talk at a minimum. We have 3 other security experts here today that are going to introduce themselves in just a minute. Another change for today, and by the way, send us some feedback and let us know if you like this format or not, marketing@highpointnetworks.com, but no PowerPoint today, no set agenda. We kind of have some topics or some bullet points that we kind of want to hit, but if it takes an organic direction, fantastic. This is kind of like Saturday Night Live. It's like live television. You never know which way it's going to take. So we're just kind of organically go with it that way. And to add a little bit of stress to the marketing team, we haven't rehearsed this. Sometimes we do that with previous presentations. So again, we really want it to come across as conversational and as organic as possible. And again, let us know how that goes. So want to make sure I hit everything here today. So the reason why we're doing this is from customer feedback. So again, let us know about topics that you want to talk about in the future. But anyway, if you as a customer, company, business, nonprofit, whatever it may be, if you experience an intrusion event, 80% of the time, it's going to result in ransomware. And in situations like that, you don't have many options to deal with that once the ransomware has taken hold, right? You can kind of re-enter the data, which is about impossible to do. You can pay the ransom, which Sean Mendel and I have talked about in the past. That might be the right thing to do in some situations. Or you kind of go to step 3, which is to do a recovery, which happens most of the time. So again, that's the reason for this specific topic today. It's really really timely and really relevant. Okay, so let's jump in. 3 of my partners today, security partners. We got Sean, Caleb, and Brian. Would all 3 of you take about 30 seconds or so and introduce yourselves? Sean, let's go with you first.
Sounds good. Thanks, Dean. Yeah, this is Sean Mendel. I am the director of the professional services team here at High Point Networks, and I also serve as an incident response manager when our team is engaged in a major incident that is causing a very high business impact.
Fantastic. Caleb.
My name's Caleb. I'm out of our billings office. I've been with High Point about coming on 4 years now. I manage our systems and security team on our smart services side. Yeah, looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Brian.
Hey everyone, Brian Benson here. I'm out of the Bismarck office. Been with High Point for just over 5 years. I work on the server infrastructure team.
Fantastic. And again, all 3 of them security experts, people that I really look up to, admire, and learn from. And all 3 of them, when we have a customer that has a ransomware event, and we provide recovery services, all 3 of them get involved with those deeply and have been for a number of years. So I really appreciate the perspective that they can bring to the table today. All right, so let's jump right in. And Sean, I'm gonna start with you if that's okay. So let's kind of do a little scenario here, kick it off with that. Let's say that we come in early in the morning, a customer gives us a call. They, in fact, are experiencing a ransomware event. That initial call takes place. We kind of get our rapid response team engaged. And as we've talked in the past, Sean, maybe one of the first things that you take a look at or consider is kind of the status or the health of their backup and recovery type of situation. Would you mind expanding on that for a couple minutes?
Yeah, absolutely. So that is definitely one of the tasks that we are looking at towards the very beginning. I mean, obviously, we're looking at a lot of other things at the same time. We generally bring in a team of folks. Initially, there's going to be a handful of us working on the incident. And one of those guys, and Brian has done this for us several times, the first thing that he's going to go look at, or one of the first things, is the backups, the health of those, the validity of those. Whether that be a snapshot from the storage solution, whether that be whatever backup solution is being utilized, we're going to take a look and see if the threat actor has compromised those or not, if there's any indicators of compromise on the backups themselves, because obviously it isn't going to be too long into the incident when that's one of the first questions our team will get is, what do our backups look like? Are they in any shape to be restored?
And so, I'd have to assume, Sean, that the reason that you're looking at those immediately is to give you an idea of what path you take.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm assuming that if the backup and recovery situation is not good, then that's going to play into, how long the recovery is going to take, and it results in business downtime, business impact.
Right.
Or if the situation, is healthy, then that gives you, confidence that, hey, this is going to go fast. Again, if it's a really kind of bad backup and recovery situation, then paying the ransom kind of, may become a higher probability of option. But when you're evaluating those, Sean, at a 30,000 foot level, what do you see that makes you, have confidence that it's a good situation? And then maybe contrast that a little bit, as to what do you see that might make you think that, man, this is going to be a long haul to get things recovered?
Yeah, well, we know from dealing with multiple cases of this that the threat actors definitely go after the backups. They will go after those in an attempt to delete the backups. That is part of their steps in their process. So if we come in and we can see that, if we can see their snapshots based off on the storage solution that have not been compromised, that gives us a high level of confidence that we're going to be able to recover those servers. If we find that backups have been deleted, we've had situations where they were in the recycle bin of the after being deleted, so we were actually able to recover those. So we've had that situation, and then we have had situations where they have simply been deleted or are gone. And at least parts of them have been. Sometimes in environments, there's multiple different backup solutions in different, maybe in different data centers or different areas of the business. And so we'll look at each of those, and sometimes we'll find one has been impacted and one hasn't. And then another factor that's also plays into that of a forward-looking plan is what type of backup is it? Is it a snapshot? Is it an image? Or is it just a file level? So we've had those situations too, where the type of backup is going to play greatly into our plan and our go forward as to what that recovery is going to look like.
Yeah.
So you mentioned
Dean, can I sneak in here just for a second?
Always.
And again, kind of ad lib here, but one other thing, since we're kind of talking about that initial discovery of backups too, is when we know there's something going on and we're doing that discovery and we're seeing what they have for storage level snapshots, what they have for their backup program. It's important to probably address that you probably don't want that to continue to run, and stop it and secure it at that point too, because, anything beyond the time of when you've discovered the incident is irrelevant, because if everything's kind of already compromised, your system's already all encrypted, we don't want that stuff, our later restores to get overwritten as the schedules proceed on, so making sure that, again, let's say storage snapshots, for example, something we go in, we stop. We also probably update credentials on the storage appliance, try to, somehow harden that down so we can, assure that when we get to the point of recovering, it's available and we have the correct timeframes to recover from. Same with your backup, if hopefully they're still there. If they are, secure it, and you know, make sure that you have it so it's not going to trail down, because the process, which we're probably going to get into more of this, the process of recovery when dealing with your cybersecurity insurance and you know, the forensics teams that they assign, it's not short, you know. So you're going to be doing this for a period of time. Make sure you have those backups available, so when they give you the okay to recover, you can still recover and not have that stuff get overwritten. I just wanted to interject those two notes.
Yeah.
But yeah, back to what you're at.
Well, one of the bullets that we wanted to hit on, and maybe a little bit later, but you guys have already mentioned the term snapshot quite a bit. And we have a variety of, you know, 100 and some people on the call today. I think maybe 70 or so. But anyway, we have a variety of people on the call. Some understand snapshotting intimately, others maybe not so much. Can you just, Brian, talk a little bit about snapshotting? And I know Sean has said previous discussions that it can be like an absolute lifesaver, especially in terms of speed. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, for sure. So you know, so with storage appliances, generally there's technology built into those to where, you know, you can do what we have been referring to as snapshots. Basically, that's a point in time on that storage appliance that it's going to back up. You know, it's basically a point in time reference, you know, and it'll create that snapshot. You have the ability to recover data or represent data from that storage appliance from that point in time that snapshot was created. So when we're referring to that, I guess that's kind of the terminology that we're getting at there. Where this has saved us, you know, with some of the ransomware infections that we've dealt with is, you know, like Sean alluded to, some people's backups have been completely wiped, removed, or just the server was encrypted, unusable, and that's where all the backups were stored. You know, whatever the scenario may be, we weren't able to use their provided backup solution and recover. Fortunately, some of these people have had storage appliances in their environment that were providing these snapshots. It's another means. It's not unless presented, you know, it's something that's kind of behind the scenes. It's more infrastructural, you know, type of backup that you can recover with based on that storage appliance, whatever you may have. You know, there's lots of different storage appliances out there that cover this. They all typically have that type of technology built into them, but it gives you the ability to represent storage from a point in time. You can basically, you know, if you're using a virtualized environment, repopulate your VMs from a point in time by recovering from a point in time snapshot on your storage appliance. It goes much faster because that's, you know, you're not having to rewrite or recreate virtual machines by restoring. You basically just present the data to VMware or Hyper-V or hypervisor of choice, you know, from that point in time, from that snapshot, and then you just bring your VMs back up from that. So it is a little bit of a time saver, which, you know, again, when you're dealing with the cybersecurity insurance team and your forensics, and that kind of drags on because it has to. I mean, that's how they do their investigations. You're about ready to just get stuff back up and running as soon as you can, you know, so that definitely has some power to it, you know, when you use that as a recovery model.
Yeah, fantastic. And you know, we talked about, you know, recovery time and recovery points and things like that. It can be complex. You know, do we get snapshots involved? How often do we do them? Do we do, you know, more traditional type of backups, you know, where it's file level and we do our fulls and our incrementals, you know, and merge those and in all of this? And it can kind of be complex, and the whole 3-2-1 rule, you know, do we need 3 copies, you know, 2 different locations, you know, 2 different media types, blah, blah, blah. In summary, and not to get salesy, folks, I mean, purpose is to not be salesy on these, but as you look at your backup and recovery situation, if you want Caleb's team, Sean's team, Brian to come in and look at, you know, your environment to help with architecture to make sure that you're meeting your business needs in terms of tolerance of downtime and how much data could be or might be lost, and then build a solution upon that, please give us a call. We'd love to have those assessment type architecture type of calls to to make sure that you're meeting, those business needs. Now, Caleb, we're going to go to you here now, but one thing that Sean mentioned, Sean's mentioned this before in presentations in those water cooler talks, is that the bad actors always go after the backups, right? That's just kind of normal operating procedure. And Caleb, you were very instrumental early on, I mean, a couple of years ago, if not earlier, bringing this concept of storage immutability into HighPoint networks in terms of our smart services, traditional products, and then conversations that we literally have, with all of our customers. We want to bring up the concept of storage immutability. Would you mind kind of talking about what that is and how it plays into a mature backup and recovery architecture?
Yeah, for sure. Well, one thing I wanted to comment on is earlier we were talking about is if backups are available in a situation like ransomware. And what immutability does is actually gives us the ability to say that those backups will be available. And the reason they are available is because of the actual architecture of immutability. Immutability allows you to set a removal window, which basically means that when data is written to that repository, it can't be removed until that window has expired. So in this case, typically a ransomware event, you'll know when that event occurs because you'll be locked out of your systems or you'll get that ransom note. It will be safe though because you're well within your immutability window, which will allow you to grab those backups and recover them. It isn't quite the same concept as the storage snapshots that Brian was talking about, but it does give you that extra peace of mind, both locally and in the cloud, that that data will be available when you need it. We do recommend as part of our best practice, I think we'll get into best practices a little bit later, but as part of our best practice that we do use immutability both locally and in the cloud. One of the more complicated parts of immutability is, and it does feel a little bit like we're going backwards, but immutability does require physical hardware instead of virtualized hardware. What we see a lot of bad actors do is go after the hypervisor environment, and if your disk is immutable, or excuse me, if the content of a disk is immutable, but the disk is in a unimmutable storage repository, deleting that disk will effectively defeat that immutability of the virtualized disk. So I'm sure we'll touch on that a little bit more later, but that's kind of immutability in a nutshell.
Yeah, fantastic. And, as Sean and I talk, well, I guess the whole team, but Sean and I specifically around water cooler have talked about certain things that, you just must have, right? So for the last 20 years, right, one of the things that you must have is a firewall. More recently in this, kind of identity type of era, in credentials being such a big part of incidents and breaches, it's like you must have multi-factor authentication. It's like no longer optional. And Caleb, would you agree that like one of the things that like you must have is at least one repository, one target, at least one, if not a couple, maybe local and cloud, that is immutable storage? I mean, I don't think that you can really go without it today.
And considering that immutability, the product we sell is, I'm not going to get salesy, I promise, Dean. The product we sell is in a private data center, but all of the major vendors also allow you to overlay immutability on top of the storage they offer. That includes Azure, AWS. So it's very accessible now too. So I would agree that there's no reason that one shouldn't or one doesn't have an immutable repository.
Yeah,
of some
so
sort.
Just to echo you, it's much more available or democratized than it was, even a couple of years ago or a year ago. It's accessible. Yep. In terms of the bad actors going after the backups, we talked about immutability. Sean, let's maybe you and Brian can kind of tag team this, but are there any other concepts of protecting those backups I mean, specifically in terms of identity, maybe it's roles-based access control on the, backup solution. Perhaps it's network segmentation, things kind of along those lines. Sean, would you and Brian mind kind of jamming on that subject here for a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, just I'll do an overview and then Brian can get into the weeds on the technical side of it a little more. But definitely having an air gap between the production environment and the backups is good. The authentication to those backups is critical. Obviously, if the threat actor does compromise an environment and authentication, the credentials they use to breach that network are the same used to access the backups, then of course they'd have access to the backups. But if you can separate that authentication, that's going to help with that as well. So yeah, air gapping, authentication, those are going to be some of the two major ones, and just having that separation between the production environment and where the backups live. I don't know if you want to get in the weeds on that, Brian, but that's definitely what we see would be hugely beneficial. Around the authentication part, even having multi-factor enabled in the environment to get to those would also, of course, be recommended to further harden that the access to those devices.
Yeah, and on the MFA part, look at that from a couple ways. So you can harden that down on the server front, getting access to the server, but applications, whatever may be doing the backup, may also have a form of MFA inside of it also. Utilize as much of that as possible, so you can lock down, the environment that it's in, but also the application that's running. On top of that, typically what we're seeing is, domain accounts are what are getting compromised. Initially, it may not be a domain admin account, but that's the goal. That's what they want to get. How they compromise the environment is they're going to get someone's domain account. It doesn't matter who. It could be a domain user, whatever, but they'll work themselves up to try to sift through your network or anything to try to figure out a domain admin account. Once they get to that level of account, they now have the keys to a lot of the things in your kingdom. And that's why when we look at setting up backups, we're not even associating the backup server in the domain as a form of protection. But with that in mind, that does not take away from another key point here, that change your passwords periodically, whether it's domain or local, is still a major factor in how to prevent compromised servers or compromised systems, is staying on top of that. And the reason for that is let's say it does get compromised. Let's say you have a higher level account in some form that does get compromised. By changing that password, simply kind of almost makes them have to start over at ground zero again, so they now lost access to whatever they had, and hopefully by changing that, you've kind of avoided some sort of incident. But so those are a couple things on top. But one other item is software updates. So not just for backup systems, but just in general, keeping your Windows servers or any servers you have, make sure they're kind of staying on patch releases, updates. Those are not just feature requests that get added, they're also security benefits to whatever application or operating system that you're using. So staying up to date on that is also a critical thing to do for your environment to help keep that secured.
And to back that up with some data, in the last 30 months, if we look at the cases that we've been a part of, 40% of those cases, the attack vector was through a known vulnerability that wasn't patched, or there was a patch available, it just wasn't applied. So to back up with data, what Brian's talking about there. And then another note on those accounts that we were talking about, if you're using service accounts or any account, having least privilege on those, giving those accounts only access to what they need to do and nothing more than that. That's also what I would call a misconfiguration we see quite often, is that accounts are just giving way too many permissions above and beyond what they need to do, what they were designed to, what they need to do.
Caleb, I didn't mean to exclude you from this conversation. Were anything that we kind of missed in terms of controlling the bad actors from getting to the backups and tampering with those in a way that would make them unusable? If not, that's okay.
No, I think Brian and Sean covered that pretty well.
Fantastic. And And I would just piggyback what Sean said about the access control, in that whatever your backup solution may be, if there's like a web interface to manage that whole thing, we want to make sure that we're using the roles-based access control within that in order to manage the backups, the targets, the jobs, scheduling, and all of that stuff. And we ought not be logging in to that backup management interface with a big gun account, all the time. If there's, specific roles types of accounts, like, hey, we're just, going to do scheduling, or we're just going to change, target locations, we're just going to, to add a system to the routine, whatever it may be, if you can use kind of a lower level account to do that day-to-day management, absolutely do that. In terms of any big gun account, like Sean said, if we can avoid using those, I think that's the best case scenario. Caleb, back to you. We've talked a little bit about, at a very high level, some strategies, some technologies, kind of the mechanics, the nuts and bolts of it. But I would say, in proper, architecture and whatnot, but I would say that those things become not as valuable as they could be unless proper operations, practices, policies, and procedures are put around that. And you being a smart services director, I know that you kind of focus on these best practices and standardizations and so forth, and that can be a huge value. So would you mind jamming on the kind of the operations and consistency, day in and day out around backup and recovery?
Yeah, I think for our services specifically, what we end up seeing is usually understaffed, or maybe some level of maybe feeling they don't have the talent or the understanding of a backup infrastructure to manage it effectively. So where we often end up coming in and augmenting is around monitoring, maintaining those, and even facilitating recovery, depending on the situation. We have a standard set of best practices that we follow. They do follow kind of what Sean and Brian were talking about. Some of them are recommendations. Obviously, in some cases, network segmentation might not necessarily be feasible, but we do have a standard set of best practices that we apply to help maintain as great a security posture as possible. We also are constantly modifying those best practices. Brian and I often do, with a couple other of our colleagues, do a couple of here we call them tabletop exercises, Brian, where we kind of discuss our best practices and how we can better augment those. And those usually happen, I don't know, conservatively 2 or 3 times a year, where Brian will see something in the wild and he'll bring it to that group, and we'll talk through it and maybe make a best practice adjustment based on the content of that conversation.
Any thoughts there, Brian and Sean? For example, ransomware situation has taken place. You guys go in and you evaluate the opportunity, the status, the availability, validity of the backup and recovery solution. Maybe almost segueing into war stories here a little bit. Are there any aspects from an operational perspective that you've seen commonly, maybe time after time? Perhaps it's customers that, again, they're short-staffed. They spin up new boxes, new apps, new services, new servers over a period of time. They're not added to a routine. They think they're snapshotting and they're not. Or, from an operational perspective, are there common things that are maybe missed?
Yeah, I think just everybody's favorite thing, documentation. You knowing more about your environment is what's going to help in the recovery process too. Obviously, we're not going to be, when you get help from an MSP, or even if you had to get all help from your cybersecurity insurance and their forensics team, they don't know your environment, so that's kind of they're relying on you for that. So you being able to document what servers you have, what they do, how they talk, as much as you can as possible, is going to help that process, obviously, when it comes to recovery. And then the other thing that gets people kind of get caught off guard with too is know your cybersecurity insurance and have that engagement with them. Sometimes there's requirements, kind of going back to when we were talking about immutability and a lot of other options out there. Sometimes they require that stuff in place. So make sure you're in talks you have, or who for your organization does that communication. Know internally, so hey, we've got an event, I need to contact this person or this position, whoever is there, so they can work with our insurance to get something engaged. Who does that? Sometimes it's a little scramble at front because nobody knows who does what, because it's not, well, we hope it's not a typical occurrence. This is something that just it happens, an unfortunate event, but that's the things that maybe there are steps that you can do to prepare yourself for it, which we hope never happens. It's like disaster recovery, right? We hope nothing like that ever happens, where you have to do that, but maybe you have to have that plan in place. And it's not just infrastructure, it's procedure.
Yeah, you have to plan as if it's not if, but when is how you have to plan. We definitely see that. We've worked with a variety of insurance companies throughout these incidences over the past few years, and some of them are really good to work with, and they know what they're doing, and it goes really smooth. Others, we have found, not to have a clue as to what the next steps are even. So best case scenario, once you contact your insurance company, you're going to have what we call an all hands phone call with everyone involved within 90 minutes. That's best case scenario. We've had it be as long as 4 to 8 hours. So you're already in a down situation, and you really can't even do much to get started, without those other parties involved. We're also seeing, as far as insurance companies go, in this last quarter, in these last 3 months, we're seeing a real shift in working with insurance companies. They are, I guess I'll just sum it by saying, you need to make sure you know what to expect when they get engaged. Well, what can you expect them to do? What can you expect from your policy? What can you expect? I can't stress that enough right now, because we're really seeing a change in that, in the expectations. And we're also starting to see more of a requirement list of things that have to be in place. And we've even heard insurance companies say, well, you didn't have multi-factor authentication, therefore this policy essentially is void. There's nothing with this policy that applies right now because it wasn't in place. So I don't know, there's a lot more to that, a lot more details to that whole conversation. But I guess to sum it up, check with your insurance company so you know what to expect when this sort of event happens.
Yeah, that's fantastic, Sean. And again, as you and I talk around the water cooler in regards to insurance, and the purpose of this call is not insurance, but it sounds like it's changed a lot recently and rapidly, Sean. And if the audience is interested in maybe a little 20-minute or 30-minute kind of another webinar thing, again, please email marketing@highpointnetworks.com, and if we see that that's of interest, then we can get Sean and team involved to speak specifically about that. But like Brian and Caleb mentioned, very specific things. I've become quite familiar with what the insurance companies are asking for, at least as recently as about 6 months ago, AIG specifically, and they ask about documentation. They want to know if you know what your critical systems are. So that would be applications, and then dependencies, like database and a hardware middle tier, web tier, whatever it may be. They want to see what a business impact analysis looks like. If ransomware or an incident were to occur, which ones do you recover first? This gets back into the recovery time objective and the recovery point. objective in on and on and on. They want to know if you have immutable storage in play, like Caleb talked about. And, just off the cuff, there's probably about a dozen things that they're looking for, specifically in regards to backup and recovery. Now, it's not that you need to have, each of those, but the insurance company wants to know how many of those you have in place, because based on that, it represents a risk to them, and then of course can affect the price of your policies and premiums and things like that. So I think everything that we've mentioned so far, folks, are really kind of on that list of things that at least AIG considers. Kayla, back to you here a little bit in regards to maybe some things we take for granted, like software as a service data. So this might be data in Microsoft 365, Google Workspace, OneDrive, different types of blob storage, whatever it may be. Sometimes there's the thought that, that vendor like Microsoft or Google or AWS, whoever it may be backing those things up and so forth. But there's, kind of some gray areas there that maybe they do, maybe they don't. If you need to recover, it's everything. You can't just do it, file level, whatnot. But would you mind, kind of jamming on, the importance of those backing up those cloud software as a service type services?
Yeah. Well, I would say that one of the things that's been interesting to me over the years is that Microsoft, for illustration, actually does have in their terms of service that they are not responsible for backing up or maintaining backups of data stored in their cloud. That would include OneDrive, Mail, SharePoint, etc. So having a solution to back up that data, point in time backups of that data is important in the event that there is loss of some sort. That loss might include loss of the provider, needing to recover that data to a new provider. Hopefully Microsoft doesn't disappear. That would be detrimental to all of us. But being able to have all of that critical business data available to you should the worst happen is important. But yeah, to your point, most of those cloud providers will absolve themselves of any liability in maintaining backups or recoverability of your data. That's solely on you as a business.
Yeah, I would agree with that. As we look at what the cloud providers will be responsible for, and it kind of goes in this ramp type of thing as you go from infrastructure as a service to platform as a service to software as a service. There's kind of like two things that they just like never touch. One of that is kind of like identity and access control. They'll have nothing to do, with managing that because there's too much liability. And then number two, like you're saying, Caleb, is like actually the data itself. I don't think they want anything to do with that, and they probably never will, because again, there's too much liability there. There's the confidentiality and integrity portion of it. Maybe they'll help with the availability of it, through network services, and distributed content networks and whatnot. But actually, the bits and the bytes of the data itself, I don't think they'll ever take responsibility for that.
Yep.
I would agree. Caleb and Brian, maybe you can kind of take this question together, guys. But okay, so we've talked about maybe the traditional, what I would call backup. So this would be file level. You're doing your fulls and your incrementals, and your synthetic type of merges and joining. We talked about snapshotting. We talked about cloud software as a service. There might be different targets. The 3-2-1 rule. It could be on-prem, it could be cloud, it could be a different colo. Maybe you have two sites connected by fiber, whatever it may be. So this can kind of become complicated, and the buzz term, and maybe this word is used too much, but like the single pane of glass, and that may not be reality. But what might be reality is to keep all of that at least in one backup and recovery platform, and not to get salesy, and maybe we won't mention product names, but is it a reality to kind of keep all of those different aspects and approaches and whatnot within a single backup and recovery platform? Is that reality?
There's a couple that can accomplish at least close to what you're describing.
Yeah.
Brian,
I think,
go ahead, Brian.
I think even some of those, Brian, right, that you can, the backup and recovery platform can almost weave into the to the disk platform, the NAS platform, and even manage snapshotting in addition to kind of the traditional backup and recovery. Is that true?
It is, and actually that brings up a good topic of conversation. There are single pane of glass. Now, is that the best thing to do? I don't know. I don't think so.
Sure.
Reason why is, let's say that backup server or program or whatever it is does get compromised. They now have keys to everything. So I like a little bit of separation. It's nice to have that single point of glass, but let's go to some of our scenarios. And again, I'm not going to mention products. Like, I think we said that like 100 times, but I didn't say it yet. So there's mine. So we've got storage platforms that have their snapshots. We've got backup products that can read the storage level snapshots. Do I want that program to see it? I guess I can come up with some reasons. Maybe, yeah, maybe there are reasons that could come in value for maybe how you do your backups. But from a visibility standpoint and a compromise standpoint, if now to my point I just mentioned is that backup server gets compromised, they also have that visibility of that. So that's where I kind of like having it separate. Because that way, if the backup server did get compromised, they don't have that key into that other kingdom that we referred to as storage level snapshots. Just for an example.
Yeah, you've given them a checklist of data to destroy.
Right. So that's where I think that single pane of glass, feature set, it may not be all it's talked up to from the point of security. By having something separate, I think you have a little bit of a benefit there, especially from what we've seen and how things have got compromised, how we keep things separate so that if one way does get compromised, the other way is, not connected, so possibly still an option for recovery. One other thing, not to steer direction from this, but I think it's important to talk about, especially when we're talking about backups and recovery from ransomware, is test your backups.
Yeah.
Validate your backups. It's very easy to put backups as something on the back burner, no pun intended. But it's something that runs, and maybe you get the email that says it's successful or not. I don't know how everybody's set up for that, but knowing that you can go out there and recover a file or recover a virtual machine, or even take your storage level snapshot, present a new data store to VMware or Hyper-V, however you can to validate that the data works is going to benefit you. Now, how often should you do that? It's a good question. We all only have
probably
so much,
has an idea too.
Yeah, they may. A lot of people don't. And I think that's a problem, is they don't test their backups, they don't validate them. So then you come to the point where you need them and something was wrong or something wasn't running or, something was corrupt. So taking that time to actually, it helps you in many ways. It's like it gets you to be familiar with your backups and what's going on. But it also validifies that I have ways to recover, and that's another gotcha that you don't want to run into when you need it.
I would also say that most of the bigger names out there have some automated form of testing. Take advantage of that, but trust but verify. Just because you get a checkbox, a green checkbox or a check mark, doesn't mean that it's actually functional. Watch it do its thing a couple times.
It's good, it's good. It's a good thing, a good process to put in place and have. But I'll always say, again, know your environment and know what to do, because I think that's going to make life a lot easier for you when scenarios come up. So you as a technical person or an IT person that's going to be involved in recovery, it's good to have the processes that could be automated to check that stuff. But for you to actually know, how do I recover a virtual machine by using a snapshot, or how do I recover a server from my backup platform? Can I do a direct, one-to-one create new VM, or do I have to do it more manually? Like I have to stage up a whole new server, and then I can restore data, and then I got to reconfigure things. How does it work for you? And for you to know that is going to be a benefit to you when the time comes.
I'm gonna
go ahead, Sean, please.
put an important fact into that scenario of their actual recovery process and knowing what your system is and capable of. And that is, depending on the backup solution and how the backups are restored, do you have the storage space to put them in place? Leaving the compromised systems as they are from an evidence perspective, those can't be touched for generally 3 weeks. They have to stay where they are in the state they're in for up to 3 weeks until those can be collected and analyzed by the forensics teams that get involved. So depending on what your storage solution is, what features it has, depending on what backup solution you have and how it works, do you have the space to restore to parallel to what's already there and compromised? That's a very important factor that, some of the storage solutions with the snapshots, we don't run into that as much because of how they work, right? It has just these reference points where it's almost like magic kind of, where you can have what appears to be double the storage and without actually using it. But if you have more of a, what I'll call, I guess, a traditional backup and recovery where you're restoring the entire image, you have to have a place to restore that too. So make sure that that is the case in your scenario, that if you do a recovery, you need to be able to do it parallel to what's there without touching it for a period of time.
Yeah, that's an interesting nuance, Sean. So just to echo what you're saying, I mean, enough capacity in terms of compute, storage, other things like that, to be able to spin up an environment almost, in parallel
Right.
to what you have. And I think this is another perspective on complexity that folks might run into in a ransomware scenario. And again, not to be salesy, but we've done these recoveries now for a number of years. We have, Caleb, Brian, a number of other, let's call them backup and recovery architects. And I believe, audience today, if you'd like them to come in and do an assessment and, kind of do a worst case scenario or a tabletop exercise that could perhaps tease out some of the things that might be missing. You might be really close if you change a thing here, change a thing there, whatever it makes the best case scenario for you. I think we'd be happy to come in and do something like that. Sean, maybe back to a war story a little bit. You and I have talked about, there's obviously benefits to putting a copy of your backups in a immutable cloud target, like an S3 bucket or Green Cloud, or whatever it may be. Again, not to mention product names. I think there's benefits to that, but we've seen something that a tabletop exercise might have teased out, and that was kind of the amount of time it might. Anyway, can you kind of comment on that, Sean?
Sure. The time to recover. So I guess I'll just start by saying this. In general terms, when an event like this takes place, you can expect somewhere between 3 to 5 days of what I'll call hard downtime, where there's going to be 3 to 5 days where any of the impacted systems will not be available. You can just sort of plan on that. Even if you do have a snapshot solution that can recover very quickly in a matter of minutes sometimes, you still have to have a secure place to restore that snapshot to. So you just can't come in and start restoring your machines from snapshots because the environment as a whole is still compromised. So there's time that's going to take place regardless of what solution you're using. You can say that, well, my solution that does snapshots can restore this in an hour. I should be back up running in an hour. Well, there's more to it than that, right? So keeping that in mind, there's also the scenario where if these backups, and we've run into this too, where the backups that are viable are offsite, they're at a remote data center, and they had to all be copied back across the WAN. And so then you can expect, days sometimes of just copying data back, depending on the scenario and the speeds and feeds and all of that, of course. So regardless of, just to, sum that all up, regardless of the solution, how quick it is to recover, you still have other factors involved, such as the securing of the environment, the hardening of the environment, trying to identify the attack vector to begin with, so we know it is secured before we start rebuilding what we call clean machines back to where they should be. But just understanding, having the expectation of how long that total recovery is going to take just from this backup solution itself, whether it's minutes or days, depending on where it's at and what process you have to go through to get it back.
And Sean, this is a difficult question, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, and maybe there's no good way to do this, but we, talked about the back-end systems that, obviously get compromised. That's where the apps are at, the valuable data. If things are down there, maybe manufacturing stops, maybe online orders can't be taken, maybe, prescriptions can't be filled, whatever it may be. So back-end systems. But then we've seen scenarios where, let's call it, the end user systems, the workstations and whatnot, get encrypted to a large degree as well. What do you do there?
Mm-hmm. Well, from a worst case scenario, which we've seen a number of times, where every server in the environment has been impacted by the event. So there is indication of compromise on every server, and also on many, if not all, of the workstations. So in a scenario where you have 400 workstations, as one example, the time it takes to recover 400 workstations, and recovery means rebuilding them, re-imaging them. Generally in an environment where there's hundreds of machines, they're not all in one location generally either. They're generally spread out over a larger geographic area, across different cities and towns, across different states even. And so we've unfortunately seen that more than once, where every single PC in the environment has to be re-imaged and rebuilt from scratch, as well as the servers themselves. So in a very, from a war story perspective, the very worst case scenario that I guess we've seen recently was every single PC had to be re-imaged across multiple states. Every single server was impacted and had to be rebuilt from scratch because there only was a file level backup. In this scenario, we only had a file level backup to work with. So now we're rebuilding Active Directory from scratch. We're re-imaging every single PC from scratch. We're reinstalling all the applications on the servers and then restoring the data from the file level backup into that environment. As you can imagine, that was very time consuming. It took weeks to get that environment back to a normal before incident state. So that's sort of the worst case scenario with the PCs. If you can protect the PCs from that, with some zero trust type solutions, we've also seen success with that, where we can see attempts on the PCs being compromised, but we're unsuccessful attempts because of the endpoint solutions that we're using there to protect those.
Caleb, would you mind, we're kind of, in rightfully so, thank you for doing that, Sean, segueing into almost a prevention type of thing. I know we have a few minutes left. Caleb, there's traditional endpoint protection. Us old schoolers, maybe we call it antivirus, EDR or whatever, but kind of there's like a new technology called zero trust protection. And we've had some situations where we, have like literally, saved endpoints from being encrypted. Would you mind just really taking like a minute or two to talk about that endpoint zero trust?
Yeah. So in addition to your traditional EDR antivirus, we also offer or recommend an endpoint zero trust solution that actually allows us to control interactions between applications. We identify what's normal, we identify what's allowed, and we block anything else. So in an event, kind of the worst case scenario that Sean was describing earlier, we actually have the ability to block the attacker from doing anything like encrypting a machine, because we've identified what's normal and the attacker is trying to do something outside of normal. We've actually, to Sean's point, we have seen success with this. We actually had an incident where we were able to save all of the workstations across a rather large organization. And we were able to watch for, I don't remember, Sean, was it 8 hours, 6 or 8 hours? They pounded on machines trying to get around the solution, but we'd already identified what was normal, so they were unsuccessful in that. It's quite a fascinating product and I think it's definitely a direction that the industry is going, more of a identify what's normal and block everything else kind of approach to security.
Right, it's really a paradigm shift. I didn't mean to go ahead, Sean.
That's what I was going to say. For all the old school people out there, you may recall something like that. So this is kind of where it's taken to the next level with those types of agents that Caleb's referring to. Is we used to, put out their group policies for software restriction policies. So that would block, executable programs and stuff like that. That was kind of how you put a control in place, in the past. You still can do it today. I'm not saying that's wrong. But this is where the applications have a little bit of a benefit. Is it's not group policy based. It's more, council controlled. It's you get more information back from it. You can adjust things. I mean, so these are really, really powerful software pieces to put on computers, servers, everything. So it learns what exactly is going on, and it will not allow things outside of what you do. So
yeah, and regardless if you're administrator, domain administrator, system, or whatever, it just
right. I had one other thing. I know we're getting close on time here, but when we were talking about recovering, the one piece is when you do have to recover from a storage level snapshot or even your backups, the one, a lot of people are going to jump the gun on that, and say, hey, I got infected. I'm going to quickly just restore things so we can get back up and running. Keep in mind, when you're restoring, you are restoring an infected environment. So make sure that you're putting, and if you're dealing with, forensics and cybersecurity insurance or an MSP at the time, you're going to have some, structured policies that we're going to put in place when you do recover. You have to do the password changes on everybody's account right away. You may have to rebuild the PCs like Sean was kind of getting at there. You may have to rebuild the servers, if we can't, somehow avoid recompromising the system when you do recover from a backup or a snapshot. But typically, I think in scenarios that we've done is when we do recover, it's in an isolated network, and then we do have, the cybersecurity team will basically allow you to do some sort of agents or antivirus or scanning utilities on there to make sure that those restored servers are good, and then they allow you to put them back into their environment continually to be monitored and everything like that. So there's a lot that goes in place after you recover to make sure that your compromised system is no longer going to infect anything. And this goes above and beyond servers. Your firewall is reviewed. They look for open channels. They try to block things, so that whatever was there and how that communication went to the threat actor is destroyed, no longer, valid. A lot of stuff goes in place when you recover. So it's not just restore, it's restore and prevent, at that same time, but work with, all the people in play so you can do that correctly and make sure it's actively being monitored so it doesn't happen again.
Fantastic. And hey, Brandy, I know we're like running out of time. Sean had a really important slide that he's been presenting in a kind of a parallel presentation. It's so important that we might send a follow-up email. I promise it's not product driven. There's not one product mentioned in this, but it's things that folks can do immediately to help their situation. From more of a preventative point of view. And I'm looking at the slide right now, and there's not one product mentioned in there. So maybe we send that out to the participants, Brandy, so they can have that over time. Sean's slide and kind of make sure that they're meeting those, or if there's a gap in that those can be addressed. So
and that was created based on the analysis of the incidences that we've been a part of.
Okay.
When we look at when the attack vector is known and we are able to do an analysis of how the threat actor was successful, these what I'm calling focus areas, if we hone in on these focus areas from a prevention standpoint, a lot of these could have likely been prevented with just a little bit of focus on a few areas, because there's a lot of commonalities that we see when it comes to the success the threat actor has and how they were successful.
Yeah, based on real world observation by Sean and team.
Absolutely. Yeah. this was put together based on our real world experience and being in these situations.
Very good.
Yeah, we can absolutely share that. Obviously, this is recorded. We'll share the recording and then probably have a couple other resources for people to share.
Yeah.
And then
cool.
do you want to open it up to questions? Do you guys have a little more content? Do you want to kind of give people a moment? So if you guys have a question, you can certainly unmute yourself or you can post that question in the chat. The gang's here. We'll just kind of give you guys a minute. Again, I'll check the chat, Dean. But if someone has a question, they certainly can unmute themselves and ask the question for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, verbally or the chat, in the Teams window, it's kind of in the middle, right up on top, the little bubble there that says chat. Or, if you'd like to contact us offline, it's marketing@highpointnetworks.com. The team here can try to answer that. If it's a more kind of in the weeds type of question, we can get a specific engineer involved. And for those of you that are, currently customers with HighPoint, you can also go through your account manager. But various different types of way to get a hold of us to have questions answered. And at the end of the day, just a pillar or a value system that is a part of HighPoint Networks is that we are here to help people. And in doing that, the whole business model just takes care of itself. But here to help people, here to build relationships, here to listen to your business needs, and then to help you specifically based on those needs. So yeah, one way or the other would love to communicate with you.
I don't see any questions in the chat right now. Again, I want to first of all thank everyone for joining us today. We certainly appreciate your time. Caleb, Brian, Sean, Dean, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much. You guys did a fantastic job today. This was great information. Again, we'll be sharing the recording at a later time, and I hope all of you have a fantastic weekend with the upcoming 4th of July holiday.